I haven't weighed in at all about Nick Fuentes, one way or the other. And in general, I don't talk shit about commentators on the right, or do the opposite, or praise them. My whole thing is I generally like to have a broad tent approach, where instead of saying so and so is useless because he doesn't go far enough, he only talks about A, B, and C, but it's really important to talk about D, E, and F. I would say, well, that person is worthwhile because at least he's able to talk about A, B, and C. So let's give him credit for that, even if he doesn't talk about the hugest issues or the most important issues or our pet issues, as a lot of us have. You know, the things that we really rightly or wrongly fixate upon. I just think that's a more fruitful approach, generally speaking, than going around saying, drawing dividing lines and saying, you got to be with this guy and this guy and this guy, and against this guy and this guy and this guy, or else you are just a shill. I try to avoid that whole mentality, because I think it's silly, and because it just doesn't. It just seems to lead to a what would you call it? A circular firing squad. And you know, we're up against it, y'all. We're up against a huge juggernaut that is unfathomably evil, and everyone out there who's saying the right thing, who is drawing attention to some aspect of the evil that's out there, is doing God's work. So that's just my preamble to this whole thing. So when I was shown this, or when my attention was drawn to this recent podcast that Fuentes gave, I was interested in the subject matter. He was talking about how, in his mind, Tucker Carlson was CIA, probably CIA, or was some kind of gatekeeper for the right, or somebody who was sent for, or was somebody who was sent in order to get people on the right not to be too obstreperous about things that the people in power don't want us to be truly obstreperous about. In other words, controlled opposition. That Carlson was some form of controlled opposition. And I have to say that I think this is the first time I ever really listened to Fuentes, and I'm not big on, since he usually talks about current issues and stuff, I'm not really big on that. Having to know what's going on, having to be in the know about what are the headlines right now, man. I gotta know. If that's apparently what he usually talks about, then that doesn't interest me. But I was interested in his take on Carlson, because this came in the context of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, Candace being on Tucker's show, and they both, for a span of about 10 or 15 minutes, talks about Nick and sort of talked down about Nick. Although Tucker did it in a way that was, well, it was definitely insulting and condescending, but it was also, he also, with his usual sort of temperament, he also said certain things, he was kind. He said certain kind things like, he's very good at doing what he does, and he's, for someone that young to be able to just speak off the cuff. But he also called him a gay child, talking out of his some basement in Chicago, which Nick had a very strong reaction to. I recommend. I'll leave the link to Nick Fuentes' response to him getting trashed by Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. I think it's interesting and illuminating, and that's what I want to talk about here. Nick draws attention to how Tucker has been talking out of both sides of his mouth, proverbially speaking, regarding his father. His father was this, he grew up in luxury and affluence, and his father was this big Washington insider and was very much affiliated with CIA. And early, there have been times when Tucker has said, as much as admitted that was true. But recently, he's talked like, I didn't know he was in the CIA until after his death earlier this year, and then I found out, and then I was shocked by it, which is pretty sketchy. All that said, though, I don't think Tucker Carlson is worthless, and I'm not like don't listen to Tucker Carlson. He's just a shill, because I think he has valuable things to say. And again, I'm a big tent kind of person. Just understand that there's nobody's perfect, and most people are very far from perfect, and most people are compromised in one way or another. And I don't even know if Fuentes might be compromised himself. I'm not sure if he is or not. But I was impressed by his dissection, his response to what they said about him, and how he illustrated certain things about Tucker Carlson that made it seemingly that made his reliability, that called his honesty and reliability into some doubt, some significant doubt. It made me remember how something that I remember overhearing Carlson saying during 2020 or early 2021, after the presidential election. I remember this was when he was still on Fox News, and I remember hearing him go on Fox News, his broadcast on Fox News, and say, to talk about election fraud, which was a risky thing to do, because I don't know if y'all remember this, but at the time, if after the 2020 election you questioned the legitimacy of the results in any way, they brought the hammer down on you. They they would give you a strike, or they might even just kick you right off social media. You were not allowed to question this notion. This, we were just told over and over again, just like we were told about the shots, and just like we were told about everything, every damn other thing in 2020, all of which turned out to be lies. We were also told, no, there's no way, the election was not illegitimate. There was no fraud, because there are they have these rehearsed little statements that they make. There are robust, our election, our system has robust means of determining whether or not, or of preventing fraud from taking place. So we can trust the legitimacy. It's just, that they don't, it's like everything else, like with bloody Pizzagate, they just said, oh, it's been debunked. Where was it debunked? Oh, it's debunked because we say it's debunked. Okay, what's your evidence for it being debunked? Well, I mean, the restaurant doesn't even have a basement. Really, that's your debunking? That's all you've got? And by the way, it did have a basement. But anyway, this was about the same level of intellectual honesty. You were just told by the system, no, you can't say that, and you're a bad person if you say that, and we're going to kick you off of social media if you question the legitimacy of the election. What I remember Tucker doing, and it really caught my attention at the time, was he devoted some segment of his show to talking about electoral fraud and saying there was fraud in this last election, and we should be able to talk about it. Which got you to thinking, okay, all right, we've got somebody going to bat for this notion, somebody who's a part of the system, who's affiliated with big media, who's actually talking about this. But then what I remember him also saying was there was fraud. Of course, it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough fraud to actually flip the results. In other words, he was saying there was fraud, but Biden would have won even without the fraud. But still, there was fraud, and that that does need to be talked about. And I remember thinking at the time, not to. I was thinking, I don't want to be churlish here, Tucker, because at least you're saying this. At least you're going as far as you're going, and saying that there was fraud. But how in the hell do you know that there wasn't enough fraud to sway the election results? How do you know that? The fact that he made that arbitrary declaration in the midst of this, of this counter-cultural, this seemingly, this broadcast where he's seemingly going against the system, going against what what we were told quite tyrannically, quite oppressively. We were not allowed to say, we were not allowed to entertain, we were not allowed to think, we were not allowed to question, because there's nothing to question. The truth is what it is, and if you don't believe in what we're telling you, you're just wrong, and you have no place. Your voice deserves to be silenced. So that was where I first thought, there's something a little bit slippery here about Tucker, that he's representing this perspective, and he would probably go further now. He'd probably say, now that I'm not sure, but I bet he would say now that the election was stolen in 2020 because it's more allowable for a person to say such a thing now. But back then, he went up to the mark of saying what was forbidden, and then maybe went a little bit over the line, because you weren't supposed to say that there was not supposed to be any fraud. You're not supposed to entertain the idea there was any fraud. But he kind of split the difference. He said there was fraud, but there was not enough not enough fraud to constitute a steal of the election by the Democrats and Biden. But there was still a fraud, and we should be able to talk about it. We should be able to look at it. And our system is far from perfect. And that was sort of when I got this impression. Yeah, he is being. There are things that he's not letting it all hang out, because he's not. He's saying what he's staying basically within the bounds of what he's allowed to say, and basically operating as gatekeeper. Not in that he's. I mean, I guess what some gatekeepers do is say, you can't go further than this. You can't say this. He didn't say. He didn't wag his finger at the audience and say, "Don't you believe this?" or "You're a bad person who deserves to be silenced." But he did deny, the most important thing. Like, who really cares about fraud if it's only if there's only a small amount of it, and if there's not enough of it to swing the election from one candidate to another? Then what does it really matter? It's still something that needs to be corrected, because who knows what will happen in future elections. But that effectively takes the teeth out of the whole allegation of fraud. So that was a time when I kind of knew what Tucker was up to. And again, when I'm saying all of this, I still am not in favor of an us versus them mentality. I think just about everybody out there, except for me, of course, is compromised. I'm not compromised because I'm in. I don't have anything to lose. And nobody pays attention to me. But if you're somebody who's been propped up, if you're somebody who's been allowed to become a success, if you're allowed to be on the air of a major network, then you obviously have to make certain sacrifices with integrity. Now, whether he does it intentionally, or whether it's just it's impossible to say in what way he or anybody else is sincere, and how he might not be sincere, or how he might not believe a word that he's saying. That goes for him, that goes for Alex Jones, that goes for Nick Fuentes, and it goes for everybody else who has managed to get out there and be a voice. I take all of them with a grain of salt, and that's what I think you should do as well. Except for me, you should believe everything I say, because I'm always right.